He had lost everything. His name, his trust, his will to fight, until one moment turned his entire life around. What happened next will make you rethink the power of pain and how it can change everything. Turning pain into power. The sun was bright, but the air felt heavy. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he walked down the cracked sidewalk. Each step echoed in his ears, louder than the traffic rushing by. His palms were damp, his fingers trembling. The smell of gasoline and hot asphalt filled his nose. He could feel sweat trickle down his back. Ahead of him, the courthouse loomed like a giant shadow. Its stone walls seemed cold, unyielding, and ready to swallow him whole. People passed by, some glancing at him, others pretending not to notice. Their faces blurred, but their voices seemed sharp, whispering words he could not quite catch. A car horn blared nearby, making him flinch. His stomach twisted, sending a sharp wave of nausea up his throat. He reached for the door handle, the metal hot under his touch. Inside, the air was cooler, but it carried the scent of old paper and tension. Every step on the polished floor sent a hollow sound bouncing through the hall. Jason's eyes locked on the man, waiting for him at the far end of the corridor. The man's face was calm, but his gaze cut deep, as if searching for the truth buried under Jason's skin. A sudden memory flashed in his mind. His hands covered in blood, his own breath ragged and desperate. The sound of someone screaming echoed in his ears, even though the hallway was silent. He blinked hard, trying to push it away, but the image stayed. His pulse quickened and his vision narrowed. He knew this moment could break him, or it could make him stronger than he had ever been. Jason took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every second press against his chest. The man stepped closer, his shoes clicking sharply on the floor. Each sound felt like a countdown. Jason's throat tightened, but he forced his chin up. He could not look weak now. The man handed him a single sheet of paper. The edges were crisp, but the words printed on it felt like jagged glass slicing into his mind. His eyes scanned the page, and with every line his body grew colder. The accusations were laid out in black ink, unflinching, undeniable. The hallway seemed to tilt, the floor shifting beneath his feet. For a moment, he thought he might fall. Then he saw it, a name at the bottom. Not his name, someone else's. The air rushed back into his lungs, sharp and sudden. Relief should have flooded him, but instead, a deeper rage began to rise. They had tried to bury him with lies. They had expected him to break. Jason folded the paper slowly, tucking it into his jacket like a weapon. The man was still watching him, waiting for a reaction. Jason gave none. Instead, he walked past him, each step heavier, more certain. Outside, the sunlight burned his eyes, but he did not turn away. The same street that felt like a prison an hour ago now felt like an open battlefield. He had been pushed to the edge. Now he was ready to push back. Jason's shoes struck the pavement with a steady rhythm as he moved forward. The sounds of the city surrounded him. Engines rumbling, voices calling, the distant wail of a siren. But inside, there was only one sound, his own heartbeat. It was not the frantic pounding from earlier. It was slower now, stronger. He passed a bench where, weeks ago, he had sat with his head in his hands, wondering if life was worth fighting for. The memory was sharp, his palms against his face, his breath shallow, the taste of salt from his own tears. The feeling of being nothing, less than nothing. He stopped in front of that same bench and looked down at it. The wood was chipped, the paint peeling in thin curls. A crumpled soda can roll slowly across the seat, pushed by the breeze. He had come here broken once. Now, he stood here unbroken. Across the street, a man in a worn jacket was watching him. Their eyes met. Something in that man's gaze mirrored the emptiness Jason had once carried. Jason crossed the road without thinking, the traffic blurring around him. When he reached the man, he extended his hand. No words, just a hand. The man hesitated, then took it. In that moment, Jason felt it. His pain had not only made him stronger, it had given him the power to lift someone else. The man's grip was weak at first, his fingers cold and uncertain. Jason held on firmly, steadying him. Up close, he could see the deep lines on the man's face, the weariness in his eyes. They were the same kind of eyes Jason had once seen in the mirror. A silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It carried an unspoken understanding, a connection born from shared struggle. Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded sheet of paper. He glanced at it for a moment, then pressed it into the man's hand. The man looked confused. "This is proof," Jason said quietly. "Proof that they cannot take everything from you." The man's eyes darted over the page, his lips trembling. Jason did not wait for a response. He turned and began walking away, the midday sun casting his shadow long across the street. For the first time in years, that shadow did not look like something chasing him. It looked like something leading the way forward. Every step carried a sense of purpose he had never felt before. He was no longer running from his past. He was walking toward something bigger than himself. A gust of wind swept through the street, carrying the faint scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Jason paused, letting the warmth of it fill his senses. It was a small thing, but it reminded him that life still held moments worth noticing. He passed a shop window and caught his reflection. The man staring back at him was different now. Shoulders squared, eyes steady, mouth set in quiet determination. Not a victim, not a ghost of who he used to be. He stepped into the bakery, the bell above the door chiming softly. The woman behind the counter greeted him with a smile that felt genuine. He ordered 2 coffees and a small bag of bread rolls. When he stepped back outside, the man in the worn jacket was still there, standing on the sidewalk, staring at the paper in his hands. Jason walked over and offered him one of the coffees and the bag of bread. The man's eyes welled, but he said nothing. Jason did not need him to. He simply nodded, turned, and continued down the street. For the first time, he realized that his pain had been more than just his own burden. It was the very thing that allowed him to recognize the wounds in others. And now, he had the strength to help heal them. Jason moved along the sidewalk, the late afternoon light stretching golden across the pavement. Shadows from tall buildings cut the street into sharp patterns of light and dark. Each step felt deliberate, as if he were walking into the kind of life he had once thought was impossible. A group of teenagers sat on the corner, their laughter loud but edged with something hollow. He recognized that sound. It was the laugh of people trying to hide their own hurt. One of them glanced at him, their smile fading for just a moment, replaced by a guarded stare. Jason slowed his pace, considering whether to keep walking or to stop. The choice was heavy, but his instincts told him he could not just pass by. He stepped closer, his presence drawing their attention. They fell silent, watching him. Jason spoke in a calm, steady tone. "I know what it is like to feel like no one sees you," he said. Their expressions shifted, some skeptical, some curious, one openly suspicious. "I am here to tell you that you are not invisible," he continued. "You can carry your pain until it destroys you, or you can use it to build something no one can take away." One of the teenagers, a boy with tired eyes, tilted his head slightly. "What if there is nothing to build?" he asked. Jason looked at him and felt the familiar echo of that question in his own past. "There's always something," Jason replied. "Sometimes you just need someone to remind you where to start." The boy's gaze dropped to the ground, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed cuff of his hoodie. Jason stepped closer, his voice low but certain. "You do not have to have all the answers right now," he said. "You only need to take the first step." The boy looked up again, and for a moment, Jason saw a flicker of something, hope or maybe just curiosity. It was enough. Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battered notebook. Its pages were filled with words he had written during the darkest times of his life. He held it out to the boy. "This got me through when I thought nothing could." Jason said, "It might help you too." The boy hesitated, then took it. Jason gave him a small nod, then turned to walk away. He did not expect thanks. He did not need it. Behind him, he heard one of the other teenagers speak quietly. "Who was that?" The boy's voice was even softer. "Someone who's been where we are." Jason kept moving, the city unfolding ahead of him like a road he had been meant to walk all along. For the first time, he felt not just stronger, but certain that his pain had found its purpose. The street opened into a wide plaza where sunlight spilled across smooth stone tiles. People moved in every direction. Shoppers carrying bags, children chasing pigeons, street musicians filling the air with warm guitar notes. Jason slowed, taking it in. It was a world still alive, still moving, no matter how many people were quietly fighting battles no one else could see. He found a bench near a fountain and sat, watching the water leap and fall in silver arcs. The sound was steady, calming, like a heartbeat outside his own. As he sat there, a young woman approached, holding a flyer in her hands. Her eyes were red, her voice unsteady. "Sir, do you know where the nearest shelter is?" she asked. Jason studied her face, tired but not defeated. He could see the storm she was carrying just behind her eyes. "Yes," he said, standing. "I will walk you there." They moved together through the plaza, her steps small, his steady. She spoke little, but when she did, it was about a job she had lost, a place she had been forced to leave, and the fear of having nowhere to go. Jason listened without judgment, only nodding when her voice wavered. At the edge of the plaza, he pointed toward a brick building with a painted blue door. "That place saved me once," he said quietly, "and it can do the same for you." The woman looked at him with cautious disbelief. "How do you know?" she asked. Jason met her gaze, the sun catching in his eyes. "Because I've walked through that door," he said, "and walked back out stronger." Her fingers tightened around the flyer as she looked toward the blue door. For a moment, she did not move. Jason could almost feel the weight of her hesitation, the fear of taking that first step into the unknown. "I do not know if I am ready," she said quietly. Jason shook his head gently. "Readiness is not what gets you through that door," he said. "Courage is." The woman's lips pressed together, and her shoulders rose with slow breath. Then, without another word, she started forward. Jason walked beside her until they reached the steps. She stopped again, turning to him. "Will it really change anything?" she asked. Jason thought back to the night he had stood in that same spot, his own life hanging by a thread. "Yes," he said simply. "Not overnight, but piece by piece it will." Her eyes glistened as she nodded. She gripped the handle, pushed the door open, and disappeared inside. Jason stood there for a moment longer, listening to the faint hum of voices from within. Then he turned and stepped back into the street, the sunlight warming his face. With every person he helped, he felt his own scars turning into something else, something like armor, but lighter. It was not just strength anymore. It was a reason to keep walking. Jason moved through the busy street, the sound of footsteps and conversations blending into a steady hum around him. A delivery truck rumbled past, the scent of diesel trailing in its wake. But even that smell felt less harsh now. He noticed details he would have missed before. The shimmer of light on a store window, the rhythmic clink of a cafe's doorbell, the faint laughter of children playing in an alley. Every sound, every sight, reminded him that life was still unfolding layer by layer. Up ahead, a man sat on the sidewalk with a cardboard sign resting against his knees. The words were written in uneven black marker. "Anything helps." Jason slowed, watching as dozens of people walked past without a glance. The man's head was bowed, his shoulders hunched, as if bracing against a storm only he could feel. Jason stepped closer and crouched down, so their eyes were level. "You hungry?" Jason asked. The man looked up, startled, as if he had not heard his own name spoken in years. Jason reached into his bag and handed him the last bread roll from a bakery, still warm. The man accepted it with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" he whispered. Jason's voice was calm but steady. "Because someone once helped me when I thought no one would." The man nodded slowly, chewing in silence. Jason stood and kept walking, his stride even, his purpose clear. Every person he met was another reminder that his pain had not been wasted. It had become the very thing that made him unstoppable. As Jason moved farther down the street, the city seemed to breathe with him. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain, even though the sky was still bright. He glanced upward, watching clouds drift slowly across the sun, their shadows stretching and folding over the buildings. On the corner, an elderly man struggled with two heavy grocery bags. Without hesitation, Jason crossed the street and took one of the bags from his hands. The man tried to protest, but Jason simply smiled. "Let me," he said. They walked together toward a small apartment building, the man speaking in a soft, grateful tone about his late wife, his grown children, and the quiet that now filled his home. When they reached the door, the man gripped Jason's arm with surprising strength. "You do not know how much this means," he said. Jason nodded. "Maybe I do," he replied. The man's eyes softened, as if he understood more than Jason had said. After the door closed behind him, Jason stood for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of the exchange. Helping others was no longer just something he did. It was the way he lived. Every act, no matter how small, was a brick in the life he was rebuilding, not only for himself, but for anyone who crossed his path. He turned back toward the street, the distant rumble of thunder reminding him that storms could come at any time. But now, he knew he could walk through them. The first drops of rain began to fall, cool against his skin. They dotted the pavement, darkening the gray stone in scattered patterns. People hurried past him, pulling up hoods and opening umbrellas, their pace quickening to escape the coming downpour. Jason did not rush. The rain felt clean, almost like a quiet baptism, washing away what little weight still clung to him. A streetlight flickered on early, its glow reflecting in the puddles beginning to form along the curb. Across the street, a young boy stood alone, his backpack soaked, his small hands gripping the straps tightly. His eyes darted between the crosswalk and the approaching traffic, unsure when to move. Jason stepped forward, splashing through a shallow puddle, and stopped beside him. "Want to cross?" Jason asked. The boy nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Together, they waited for the light to change, the rain drumming steadily on the asphalt. When the signal turned, Jason kept the stride even, letting the boy match his steps. Halfway across, the boy glanced up and said quietly, "Thanks." Jason smiled. "Anytime." On the other side, the boy ran toward a small diner, disappearing inside where warmth and light spilled out onto the wet sidewalk. Jason stood there for a moment, the rain soaking through his shirt, and realized something. Every person he helped was another thread in a web of strength he was weaving, not just for them, but for himself. Jason continued down the rain-slick street, his reflection shifting in each puddle he passed. The clouds above began to break, letting thin beams of sunlight pierce through, painting the wet pavement in streaks of gold. He stopped at the edge of the plaza, the same place where his journey had begun not long ago. Back then, he had stood here feeling hollow, lost, and invisible. Now he felt grounded, present in every breath, every heartbeat. He looked around and saw people moving through their own struggles, their own quiet battles. He knew he could not solve them all, but he could make a difference, one moment at a time. The rain eased to a mist, and a faint rainbow arched over the city skyline. Jason smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because he finally understood something. Pain had not been the end of the story. It had been the beginning. And as he stepped forward, disappearing into the hum of the city, he carried that truth like a light, bright enough to guide himself and anyone else who needed it through the dark.